Lazaire, I believe I have a solution. Do you remember what happened in Chesterton? I have some red scale. I believe I finally have a use for it. I know. Yes, I understand. I know how to summon her. Get to mine as quickly as you can once my broadcast finishes. It's the only chance we have, Lazaire. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Matters to address. Let us continue the story of the Sunken wreck. I arrived back at my room and quickly threw my coat off, then sat on the bed and began to read. The first entry was started in 1943, nearly 40 years ago.
October 12th, 1943. Rodney came to me today with a request, one I still frankly cannot believe. He has asked me to partake in a ritual of some kind, something he believes will drive the demon away from our town. I told him it was nonsense. To practice such things is heresy, regardless of their intent. The Lord is our Saviour. I kept trying and trying to convince him, but he would not listen. He is adamant that I must be involved in this ritual, as his last few attempts have been less than successful. He seems to believe the presence of a devout priest will strengthen the effect of this ritual, make it more powerful against the evil that now stalks our town. I told him I would think about it, but truthfully, I am hopeful that he will simply abandon the idea of my involvement. I do not intend to partake. October 28th, 1943. Rodney has been insistent for days now, and though his reasons are repeated continuously, I am growing more and more fearful of the demon. It has been appearing each night now, and I even saw it glide through a solid wall on a late-night walk. I was beyond terrified. I have faith in the Lord to protect us, but perhaps the ritual Rodney offers is that protection. I still have my doubts, however, fearful that the ritual will make me a heretic in the eyes of God if I am wrong. November 1st, 1943. I have decided to partake in the ritual. I went for another late-night walk, being sure to carry a large lantern with me as I wandered through the town for protection. Rodney believes the demon fears light. I made my way back to the church when I saw it, staring at a grave. It then moved quickly, so horrifically quickly, and ran straight through the walls of the church and vanished within. Had I been inside, I would surely have been killed. Truthfully, my faith has been shaken. This evil can walk holy ground and move into a church with complete freedom, something I had deluded myself into believing was impossible. I am frightened for my mortal soul. I will partake in the ritual. November 20th, 1943. The ritual was performed last night. To my surprise, my involvement was minimal, as it seemed Rodney wanted me to perform some rites beforehand and then just have me observe. He says he has tried to perform it before, but it has never taken, but firmly believes with my involvement its potency will be enough. The ritual itself was fascinating. Rodney used various components such as some tree bark, some bones of a kind, and other items I did not recognize. They were set ablaze in an iron dish with the help of alcohol, but the flame burned purple on contact as he chanted in a language I had not known. But the word Borvo appeared many times. I began to fear we were dabbling in things we did not understand, but my fear of the demon overcame my fear of heresy. Rodney then laid upon a small stone altar and lost consciousness. He told me exactly what would happen, but my doubts almost reached breaking point when Rodney stopped breathing. He said he would appear dead for almost an hour, then return to life. It was a necessary penance to the ritual. I observed the whole time, certain he had simply committed suicide. And then he startled awake, gasping for air. The ritual was concluded. God, I hope I never have to do it again. November 25th, 1943. The demon took another, the night of the ritual. Rodney has told me that it is likely we were not quick enough, but now the ritual is complete. The demon will not appear for another 10 years, when the ritual must be performed again. I was furious. Rodney told me that the demon would be banished forever if the ritual was a success. He said nothing of repeating it in years to come. I threw my anger at him, cursing him and his ritual, and blaming him for the death of the child. He said nothing and took his leave, but in the quiet of the night I feel I owe him an apology. The demon has not been spotted since. If no others go missing in the next year, I will believe Rodney and agree to the ritual in the years to come. But truthfully, I am still troubled, for I do not know what to believe anymore.
The journal then has an entry every 10 years, stating that the ritual was performed successfully, but the entity took another life each time. This trend is broken when the diary is written in yesterday, the evening I spoke with him.
November 12th, 1981. Rodney's funeral was today. He passed away 10 days ago, and in that time the entity has already taken 3 people. I don't understand. The ritual was conducted 8 years ago. It shouldn't be cited for another 2 years. Has Rodney's death rendered the ritual worthless? God, if that's true, then there's no hope left. It was all for nothing. The demon will devour this town, and my involvement was nothing but an affront to God. I don't know anymore. If anyone ever reads this, know that I'm sorry for failing you. I should have done more. Please don't hate me, Lord, for what I did. Please don't cast me out when I come to you. It will not be long now.
I placed the diary down and pondered silently on this knowledge. Carl believed it to be a demon, but demons act more intelligently and insidiously than the creature I saw in the alleyway. None of the pieces matched. This was nothing like what I had seen before. I knew only 3 things. The entity was physical with the ability to phase through matter. It did not devour people so much as simply took them, and it had a disdain for bright light. The closest entity to it was a poltergeist, but even this theory had major flaws. The ritual intrigued me. The bones and wood with the mention of Borvo suggested it was Celtic. However, no Celtic ritual could be used to appease or banish a spirit with this effectiveness, as Michael or Carl reported. Whatever this creature was, it had killed well over a dozen people, and the only solution found in over 40 years was a ritual that would temporarily reduce its attacks to 1 or 2 a decade. I mulled over the facts until 2:30, then put my coat on and made my way out once again. Michael was already on the beach when I arrived. Clouds had once again come in from the ocean, and the strong wind was now impeding movement as I approached him. Did you arrange the meeting?
Aye. We'll head over there in a few hours. I'm gonna start losing people's trust if you can't help, August. I don't even know why I'm trusting you so much. If I found out you had anything to do with Father Pierce's death,
I took the diary from my coat and handed it to him.
What's this?
Father Pierce's journal. I found it whilst he was being tended to. Michael's expression was filled with intense rage, but I met it with conviction.
You raided a man's drawers while he was dying in the next room. I should bust your head open right here, you scum!
He motioned towards me, but I held my ground. Michael, people are dying and will continue to die. I know he was your friend, but it was the only chance I had at finding answers. Read the last entry. Michael opened the book, and I saw the rage melt from him as the words entered his mind. Michael shed a tear and turned from me. Michael, I don't think we're going to find answers in this town quick enough. You mentioned the entity first emerged years ago when a ship sunk out at sea. I believe the answers lie within that wreck. Michael turned back to me after wiping his face.
August, that place is cursed. Any man who tries to fish in those waters comes back swearing never to return. If you're planning to go out there, I'm not going.
My own rage boiled within me. Fine. Fine, you stay here safe on land and watch as the people you care about get taken. I honestly haven't taken you for a coward, but clearly I was wrong. Michael rose to challenge me.
Don't you dare. I've lived in this town my entire life, lost my mother to this creature. Now I don't know what you think you know, but so far I haven't seen you do jack. You've stolen from a dead man and nearly got yourself killed by the creature. That's it. I won't be spoken down to by some posh boy from out of town who says my eye doesn't match his books.
And I do not appreciate, Michael, being told that my knowledge is inferior to your experience. The two are equal, and I happen to have both. So perhaps if you want to stop listening to your lifelong fears, you might be able to help me save this town you apparently care for so much. The air hung heavy after my rebuttal, and I wasn't sure if I'd convinced him or lost my only ally. Finally, Michael's shoulders slouched.
I'll consider it. On 2 conditions. You prove to me tonight that you do know what you're talking about. And you tell me everything you know so far. I can't be bothered to go through this whole bloody diary myself.
I nodded, and we began walking to the dock. I told Michael every relevant detail of the diary about the ritual and Carl's involvement. It troubled Michael that Carl would partake in a ritual outside of the Christian faith, but accepted it was likely a necessary part if Rodney had requested it. We approached a ship moored at the dock, a typical fishing vessel that had clearly been weathered by many years.
She's not much to look at these days, but she'll get us where we need to go.
Michael hopped on and started tinkering with parts I had no knowledge of, so I left him and approached the edge of the dock. The ocean was choppy and murky from this vantage point, but I clearly saw something move suddenly under the water. Michael, are there any large ocean creatures this close to the shore? Michael looked up from the boat with urgency.
Mr. Reach, step away from the edge right now.
As his words met my ears, a tentacle shot out from below the water and grabbed my torso, and I was violently pulled in. As I felt the freezing waters engulf me, I was unable to resist the pull of whatever had just grabbed me, but I kicked and thrashed against the mass of tentacles that seemed to suddenly engulf me. The central one constricted tighter around my chest and forced the remaining air out of my lungs, removing any strength I had left to try and fend off the rest of the tentacles, and I lost consciousness. I awoke suddenly, coughing up great gulps of water with the wooden planks of the dock beneath me. After a few minutes of violently clearing my lungs, I turned to see Michael laying beside me, breathing heavily and exhausted. I finally managed to get some words out. What in God's name happened? I managed to sputter out. Michael just pointed to the edge of the dock to the left of the boat. I got to my knees and looked over the edge to see the body of a giant squid with large cuts all over it floating in the water. I turned back to Michael. Why is there a giant squid in the dock? Michael eventually regained his breath back enough to get to his feet.
I just saved your damn life, and all you have to say is questions about the monster.
I coughed again to expel more water before getting to my feet. Michael sheathed his large knife, both of us drenched from head to toe. Thank you, Michael. I would have died were it not for you.
Don't make a habit out of it, August. I'm too old to save you again.
I nodded my appreciation. Is it common for them to come so close? Michael spat onto the dock.
Not really. Maybe get 1 or 2 sightings a year. About 30 years back we had an attack just like this. Most people steer clear of the water's edge now.
I have never seen a giant squid come this far inland.
Neither have I. Only heard the stories. These are why fishermen won't go near the wreck. They gather around it even though it's only a few 100 meters deep. No one knows why. This one must have gotten too curious.
I stood up onto my feet, making sure not to get closer to the water's edge. I don't understand.
August, can you think out loud so I don't feel like I'm talking to a brick wall?
None of it adds up. The entity does not consume in the inspected manner, does not seem sentient of itself, but has all the physical properties of a spectre. Rodney was using a Celtic ritual to banish it, something I've certainly never come across before. And now you tell me the wreck attracts deep-sea squid, implying the artifact has an affinity towards the blind realm.
The blind realm?
It's an ancient term that encompasses most, if not all, deep-sea paranormal phenomena. This is why I've been so confused, Michael. Entities that originate from the deep ocean can barely comprehend anything outside of it, occult or otherwise. It is why so few instances of oceanic paranormal entities encroach on the land, and when they do, they are isolated incidents, not prolonged episodes like this.
So you can't see how the puzzle pieces fit together yet?
What I'm saying, Michael, is so far I feel like we have pieces from entirely different puzzles. Michael and I left the dock and returned to his house to change into fresh clothes. His were a size too large for me, but I made do, and I left mine to dry. Our meeting with the Madisons was in half an hour. Michael had arranged for us to have dinner with them to see if I could find out anything about the victims. As we walked, several of the townsfolk met my eyes with hard, unwelcome stares. Perhaps they believed I was to blame for the resurgence in attacks. I was grateful Michael walked with me, who exchanged several nods with other people as they walked past. I caught the eye of the woman I first spoke to on my arrival in Chesterton, whose expression was also filled with distrust. Michael, who was the woman on the other side of the road? She was the only person I could find in town not at Rodney's funeral yesterday.
Emma.
Michael's voice took an annoyed tone.
She suffered more than most, I must say. Creature took her mother the last time it appeared, whilst Rodney was still alive. And it took her younger sister a week ago. I was surprised she even gave you the time of day. She blames everyone in town for what happened.
I met Emma's gaze again, but this time she turned and walked in the other direction. We passed the hotel where Shannon was outside doing some cleaning, but quickly got up as she saw me coming down the road.
Oh, Mr. Reach, I wondered where you ran off to. After what happened this morning to Father Pierce, I came back here expecting you to be in your room. Are you doing all right?
I'm fine, Shannon. Are you? I'm sorry I rushed off, but I felt as a stranger it was inappropriate of me to stay. She nodded, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes.
You were one of the last people he had a conversation with. Did he seem off to you in any way? Did he hint at what he was going to do?
I didn't feel that way about him when I spoke with him last night.
Okay.
Shannon wiped a single tear away from her eye.
I'm sorry, he was such a good man. I wondered if perhaps we were blind to his unhappiness due to how close we all were with him. I'm glad I was wrong. I don't know what I'd have done if he had been reaching out for help and we ignored him.
It was at this point that she first noticed Michael behind me.
Oh, Mr. Hurd, I didn't see you there. Were you at this morning's congregation?
Aye, we lost a great man this morning.
Indeed we did. You do make friends quickly, don't you, Mr. Reach? Where are you two headed off to?
Before I could think of an excuse, Michael's voice carried past me with conviction.
Just showing him around the town, taking his mind off this morning. I think we all need to keep our heads down at a time like this, especially with the creature attacks.
Shannon seemed to flare for a split second before she smiled and nodded.
Quite right. I'll leave you to it. I assume you still have your key, Mr. Reach.
Indeed, thank you. Shannon went back to her duties and we kept walking. Michael had a heavy frown on his face. I take it you don't like her, I whispered. Michael groaned.
I bloody hate that woman. Not a single piece of gossip in this town she doesn't hear first. And that's impressive here, always poking her nose into others' business. Still, it must be doing her some good.
Why do you say that?
That woman looks 10 years younger than the last time I saw her. And that was 4 years ago. Maybe there's something to this busybody lifestyle after all.
We arrived at the Madison house a little after 6 when it was already dark. A small woman with dark long hair and a timid complexion opened the door.
Good evening. You must be Mr. Reach. Please come inside.
Myself and Michael stepped inside a hallway, and before I could remove my coat, a man came round the corner.
My name is Janice, and this is my husband, David.
David stepped up to me and extended a hand, which I shook firmly to match his grip. He then shook Michael's hand as well.
Thank you for coming. Michael tells us you may be able to help us get our son back.
I shot Michael a quick glance, but he met with a rigid glare. Before I can continue, you must understand I don't know if that's possible, and I cannot make any guarantees. There is still the possibility your son will never come home. I'm sorry for being so blunt, but I don't believe in spreading false hope. Both Janice and David looked at each other, but Janice nodded and David turned back to me.
We'll take what we can.
I nodded, then removed my coat and boots and went into their dining room. I noted the house was immaculately clean except for what I presumed was the son's personal items lying around. I took a seat at the dining table where Michael, David and Janice joined me. Do you believe in the creature that took your son? Or do you feel that he has simply gone missing? They both looked at Michael.
Not my place to tell him your business, David. That's what this is about.
We fully believe in the demon, Mr. Reach. We watched it take our boy.
I nodded. I suspect that there may be a connection between all the victims, something that will allow me to identify this entity.
Wait, you don't know what it is. It is a demon, Mr. Reach. Pure evil.
Janice's voice was assertive. It could be any number of things, but I can guarantee you it is no demon. Did your family attend Sunday church at all?
We did, but Tom didn't. Our parents pushed us into the faith. We decided it was best to let him make up his own mind.
David spoke softly. Were others that were taken practicing their faith? I asked Michael.
Aye. Well, some used to go to service on Sunday.
I sighed. What were your son's hobbies?
Well, he liked to read and listen to music. It seemed okay to us, nothing heretical.
Did he have any friends or classmates that might have been a negative influence? Anyone he associated with you didn't trust?
He was a teenage boy. We didn't care much for any of his friends.
David spoke. Janice thought for a second.
Nothing out of the ordinary. They all got in trouble, but...
Janice began to cry, and David held her.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just miss him so much.
Michael shot a glance at me. I looked off to my side and saw a fireplace, fresh wood lying next to it. I stood up and moved closer to it. The night your son was taken, was it in this house? I asked.
Yes. It was by the window, looking out onto the back garden. Its arms came through the wall and pulled him through it. We didn't even hear him scream. We followed all the rules. We had the lights on. We don't go near any windows now when it's dark.
Janice whimpered as she wiped her tears. Was the fireplace lit? I stood up and looked outside the window, the darkness of the night cloaking over it as there were no light sources behind the house.
No, we'd run out of wood, and we wore extra layers.
David spoke. I took out my lighter and attempted to light the fire.
What are you doing?
David asked. Fire is more than just a light source, Mr. Madison. It is also a barrier if lit within a confined space. It acts as a shield to certain malevolent forces. I highly suspect that the creature is some kind of spirit, and therefore a fire would protect you. I couldn't get my lighter to work, so I abandoned it temporarily. I believe now that this creature acts like a conventional predator, drawn to weak or easy prey first before taking risks on others. Immediately outside of your property, the area is pitch black. The creature likely got as close to the property as it could, before reaching through the walls and grabbing your son. It wouldn't have done this if there were easier prey, but I imagine the entire town keeps lights on at night now to prevent attacks. I picked up my lighter and tried again. As it lit, the lights of the house suddenly cut off. The only thing illuminating us was the lighter.
Oh God, no, no, no.
Michael's voice was filled with dread, and Janice once again cried fresh tears. I immediately moved to light the fire, but it had to be a strong fire to effectively seal the room. That would take time. As the kindling began to fizzle, I heard the same heavy breathing of the creature from the night before.
It's here. The creature did this.
Michael whispered. David leapt up and ran to the kitchen.
The fuse box, it might have just tripped.
Janice ran after him. I got up and moved swiftly. Michael, follow me. We must stay together. This is the only fire we have for now. Michael got up and followed me into the other room, where David was attempting to look at the fuse box in the dark. I stepped forward with the lighter and held it in front of him so he could see. I beckoned Janice and Michael closer, and they huddled behind for their best protection. Michael was intently watching behind us, body rigid from fear. "Can you fix it?" I whispered.
None of the fuses tripped. This is a power outage.
David's voice seemed to lose all hope, and as he met my gaze, a flash of claws came passing through the wall, latching onto David's face. I didn't have time to react, but the entity's arm was directly above the fire of the lighter, and it let out an unearthly cry, before retracting its arm and leaving deep gashes in David's face. It happened in a moment, so the entity had vanished again before David even had time to let out a cry of pain. We all staggered back into the center of the room, and the entity phased through the wall directly ahead of us. Janice took David's face in her hands, blood pouring through them. David winced in pain.
I'm fine, sweetheart. Worry about yourself.
The entity stopped and stood motionless as I held the fire out at arm's length directly aimed at it. The creature took another step closer, but so did I. I knew fire hurt it now, and I was emboldened. It shrunk back only a step, but kept no further. If I had stepped too far forward, it would likely dart through a wall and grab one of the others. It was impossibly fast, but not overly intelligent. If we looked protected, it would likely wait until it had a clearer chance. "What are you? What do you want?" I whispered. It continued to exhale loudly, seemingly unresponsive to my queries. "I asked you a question. What do you want?"
August, stop taunting it.
Michael whispered. "It doesn't understand me, Michael. This is a mindless animal. I've never seen anything like it."
The fireplace must be burning by now. Why isn't it leaving?
David struggled to say. "The fireplace only forms a barrier for the room it's in. Once we left the living room, it became useless."
Then I've killed us. Janice, I'm sorry.
David began to wail, but Michael grabbed him by the shoulders.
For God's sakes, you have a wife who needs you. Get it together, man. We just need fire, right, August?
Michael spoke behind me. I had my gaze fixed onto the creature in front of us, my lighter barely illuminating the thin black cloth covering its face. "Yes, we need more fire." The fire shrank slightly before my eyes, and the creature took another step forward. "But we need it now. We've got minutes left." I stepped back to huddle closer to the others. Michael frantically searched the kitchen sides before he knelt down and started searching through the cupboards. He pulled out a plastic bottle, then seemed to re-energize. He took a glass bottle on the kitchen side and poured out its contents, before filling it with the liquid in the plastic bottle. He then grabbed a nearby rag and began stuffing it into the top of the bottle. "I can't move the lighter, Michael. You need to move to me." He stepped past Janice and placed the rag over the top of the flame. The light shrunk again, likely seconds from extinguishing, as the creature took another step forward. It was barely 3 feet away from me now, and just as the lighter went out, the rag caught, and flames began to climb it. The creature took a few tentative steps backward, but Michael tossed the bottle onto the floor directly beneath it, flames erupting over the ground as the glass shattered. The creature let out an unholy cry of agony before almost leaping through a wall and out into the night. We all let out a sigh of relief, and David began to move towards the fire. "No, don't move. If you put out the fire, it could come back. It was a deterrent, but nothing more. We did not actually wound it." David nodded, the blood on his face having mostly congealed. The fires began to climb the cabinets quicker than I could have anticipated over the next minute or so, and suddenly David could not have put it out even if he wanted to. I looked out of the kitchen window and saw a shadow dart behind a house 4 doors down the street. It had run away. We had to escape now. "Everyone, it's safe to leave. Run outside to the streetlights." We all struggled to breathe as we waded through the now thick smoke, eventually reaching the front door and out into the night. I feared we might be grabbed between the house and the glow of the street lamp, but fortunately, we all made it out. Thick smoke now bellowed from the house, with flames growing steadily beneath it. Fortunately, the house was spaced far enough apart from the others that the fire would not catch, but I felt deeply sorry for the Madisons that their livelihood was burning before our eyes. Janice came up to me as her husband cried on the ground, and before I could apologize, she hugged me tightly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, my husband and I would be dead.
She began to cry, and I held her as best I could to comfort her. Michael came and stood next to me as others with flashlights came out of their houses to investigate the smoke.
We need to go, August. You'll take the blame for this if you stay. Janice?
She looked up at Michael through tear-stained eyes.
Tell no one August was with you this evening. You know what people will do.
She nodded quickly, then went back to her husband and comforted him. "Michael," he turned to me. "The victims had no typical connections, nothing linking all this together. We're no closer to saving this town. There's only one thing left for us to do. Does this town have any kind of submersible?" Michael gritted his teeth.
August, I told you we can't.
"Do you trust me now, Michael? Fully?" He looked back to the Madisons, who kissed each other, crying as their house burned. He slowly looked back to me.
I do.
"Then answer me. Does this town have anything we can use to get me to that wreck?" He sighed heavily.
I know something we can use. When do you want it for?
I looked at the building, which was now billowing smoke, flames dancing upwards from every window. "Tomorrow morning. First thing. Someone is coming to this town tomorrow afternoon, and if I do not have answers for him, I can only imagine what will happen.
What are you talking about?
All I can tell you is we need to know what's going on here, or the whole town is in far greater danger." Michael nodded reluctantly.
Fine, let's go. Best your state of mind tonight, so we're both safer.
We both made our way back towards Michael's home, never straying from the streetlights until we reached the beach. I awoke in the morning to find Michael had laid out my clothes from yesterday, washed and dried. He left a note that read, "Meet me at the boat." I can only assume he got up early to make whatever preparations he had in mind, so I dressed quickly, deciding the waistcoat was no longer appropriate. I threw on the coat and stepped out of Michael's home and moved swiftly towards the docks. As I approached from the other end of the dock, I could see a large sphere comprised of metal. It appeared rusted, and as I neared the ship, it had a dirt-covered circular window on one side. "Michael, where in God's name did you get a bathysphere?" I was gobsmacked. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect form of transport to the wreckage.
About 15-odd years back, a bunch of deluded explorer types heard about the creature. They came to town and found out about the wreck. Had more money than sense, that lot, and they came back with boat and this and went off to see what they could find.
What happened to them?
Only saw him head out and never saw him come back in. From what I heard, though, one of them went down in this. After an hour of sending him down, they pulled it back up and he vanished. Nothing inside. Not a drop of water inside it either. Like it had never been opened. So they say. Spooked them so bad, they came back to shore, dumped all the stuff, and no one's worn them since.
And you decided to sit on that information until now?
I told you the wreck was cursed. Figured that was enough. Why? You know what's going on now?
I sighed heavily. No. It just brings up more questions. Is it in a suitable state? Michael gave the bathysphere a light knock.
No, don't be fooled by the rust. That's only the surface. I've checked her over. 3-inch thick steel this is, Mr. Reach. No leaks I can find. Perhaps some higher power knew you'd need it someday.
I hadn't taken the time to appreciate the depths of Michael's faith. It was for this reason I hoped he didn't meet Lazaire. I'll need to clean the window. It'll be my only chance to assess the wreckage. How long until you can get it attached to the winch?
About another 20 minutes, then we can start to move. We should be wary, though. A lot of cloud overhead. Could turn at any moment.
I nodded and got to work preparing the bathysphere. The ocean seemed murky and irritated today, slapping against the sides of the ship as the dock shrunk behind us. I tried to remain calm and appear in control, but frankly I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to encounter, and the blind realm supposedly contained many entities that either showed gentle curiosity towards outsiders, or simply annihilated intruders. I was not confident of the former if the story of the explorers was to be believed. The bathysphere was as Michael said. Thick steel would protect me from the pressure of the deep ocean, but this left little room inside for comfort. A single seat, a cabinet likely to hold provisions, and the newly cleaned window were the only things of note inside. I trusted Michael that this was hold, even if I had my doubts. But he had put his faith in me, and had done nothing but aid me in trying to decipher this mystery. I owed him that trust in return. Suddenly, I felt a silence befall me from all senses. The wind died away in an instant, and the ship stopped its rhythmic shaking. Michael had stopped the engines, and as I looked over the edge, the water was perfectly still, like a sheet of glass were it not for the ripples made by the boat. This atmosphere was unlike any I had ever felt, like we were in a place that did not want our presence, and should have remained empty.
"We're here,"
Michael shouted.
"I have to ask August. Are you sure you want to do this?"
He made his way down the boat and prepared the winch for the bathysphere. I removed my coat and placed it on the side. I have no choice. This is the only way I can be certain. I climbed into the bathysphere, Michael ready to close the door on me. How long will it take to lower me to the wreckage?
Water here is over 200 meters deep. I'd say half an hour.
And start pulling it up in exactly 1 hour. Michael nodded and pushed the heavy steel door closed, secured the lock, and all sounds fell away from me outside from my now heavy breathing. I had limited air. I needed to stay calm for the entire journey. The bathysphere was suddenly lifted from the deck and placed over the edge of the water. I looked at Michael through the window as the bathysphere lowered, and felt my body tense as the water raised from the bottom of the glass until I saw nothing but the underside of the ship and the emptiness of open ocean. The bathysphere lowered further and further until the ship had risen above the view from my window, and the blue of the ocean engulfed my view. I had taken a torch and my lighter as my only equipment, though the lighter was more for comfort than practicality, as it would eat into my limited air supply. The ocean grew darker and darker as I descended further and further, but surprisingly I found myself becoming calmer and calmer. The emptiness of the ocean outside the window was numbing me to the reality of it all, and I began to feel as if I may as well be sitting in a pod on the surface with a curtain drawn over it. I finally reached a depth that I would consider to be devoid of light, and I was truly in the blind realm. Very few men had ever been down here, and though I was curious, my innate caution and fear of this far surpassed it. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye from the window, and shone the torch directly at it. The light barely penetrated a foot into the darkness, but I knew something was out there now. All the calm I had cultivated vanished in a moment, and my heart began to beat in my chest. I felt a collision from behind me as something crashed into the side of the bathysphere, knocking me forward, but not with much force. A large tentacle suddenly surrounded the window, suckers firmly attached to the glass. I could barely see past it, but I shone my light out of the window to see a giant squid swim within feet of the bathysphere, and then into the darkness again. After a few moments, the tentacle detached from the window, and I barely caught the tip of another giant squid, detaching from the bathysphere and fading into the darkness. The giant squid sightings only became more frequent, and I felt at least 7 or 8 more attached to the bathysphere in succession, before realizing it wasn't a meal and detaching. One even attached over the window, with a beak as large as my head that caused me great fear it would crack the glass. Fortunately, it could get no purchase, and soon lost interest. I began to realize the squid had a green glow to them, and turned off my torch to better adjust to the light. The glow came from beneath, and with my adjusted eyes I could see easily several dozen silhouettes of giant squid swimming through the ambience. They did not swim in patterns or with purpose, but nonetheless this glow had clearly drawn them here in great numbers. If they surrounded me on all sides and extended past the glow, I drew the conclusion there must be thousands of them here. I was close to the bottom now. Even though it had been over half an hour, I would still have plenty of time to make my observations. The wreckage came into view beneath when I was approximately 10 meters above it, but there seemed to be some sort of aura around it, a ripple that was separate from the glow. I realized the bathysphere would pass through it if I kept descending, and there was nothing I could do to tell Michael to stop. I braced myself, but as I looked through the window, the ripple passed harmlessly past it, into what seemed like an air pocket. With a large thud, the bathysphere came to rest, finally, on the deck of the sunken wreck. I peered through the window. The ripple effect was some sort of bubble that seemed to have formed around a portion of the wreckage, and it all appeared perfectly dry. I looked up through the glass and could make out the squid circling above and around this barrier, never crossing through it. I noticed the dust floating back down to the deck of the sunken ship, indicating there was air down here. I couldn't see anything of note from my vantage point, and felt I had no other choice but to open the door of the bathysphere. I steeled my resolve, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. A wave of cold air hit me, my breath instantly fogging. I quickly stepped out and pushed the door to the bathysphere closed, trying to preserve some heat for the return journey upwards. I noticed as I stepped out that the bathysphere was completely dry, no dripping or puddles to be found. Whatever this barrier was, it seemed to exclude all seawater from entering. If it was created by an artifact, it was not one that had an affinity with the blind realm. I checked my watch. I had exactly 18 minutes before the bathysphere would begin its ascent. There wasn't much to explore. It seemed that this was only a simple fishing vessel like Michael's, and the glow emanated from within the wheelhouse. The wood of the deck was in surprisingly good condition due to the lack of moisture, and I found myself confidently walking forward. I entered the wheelhouse, and once I adjusted to the source of the intense green light, saw several skeletons that were likely the original fishing crew. One held in his hand something that could be described as a compass in size and shape, but with runes carved over a blackened top face rather than glass and a needle. The light seemed to be emanating from a trunk, bright enough to cause the glowing, it seemed. I turned my head away as I opened the trunk, and to my surprise the glowing dimmed as I swung the heavy lid open. Inside were all manner of artifacts. Some I recognized, some I didn't, and some I feared to even touch. The green glow came from an obelisk of some kind, a simple hexagonal rod made from a black stone I could not identify, roughly 8 inches long and 1 inch in diameter. I dared to pick it up from the trunk, and as I moved it about in my hand, the glow seemed to shrink more and more, until the green light came only from the grooves and cracks on its surface, then suddenly shone forward like a flashlight. The light went through the open door of the wheelhouse and penetrated impossibly far into the darkness of the blind realm. The giant squid reacted immediately, attempting to swim frantically in the much narrower green ray of light I'd created. My curiosity got the better of me. This was an experience I would never have again in this alien world. I stepped out of the wheelhouse and pointed the artifact suddenly into the ocean on the port side, watching as the squid darted from one side of the boat to the other to stay within the light. I didn't know exactly what this artifact was, but it felt like a beacon of some kind, but what purpose I couldn't say. It was certainly nothing to do with the entity terrorizing Chesterton. I remembered the time and checked my watch. I had 11 minutes left. I pocketed the hexagonal rod, then went back into the wheelhouse. I lifted the strange compass-like item off of the skeleton's hand, suddenly hearing the water around me move in tandem with it, and the symbols lit up. I froze. The top of the air pocket had risen about a foot from where it was before. This artifact must be creating the pocket, displacing the water within a certain radius. I placed it back down gently, deeply fearful I might accidentally deactivate it and be crushed in a heartbeat. I would rather leave it here than unwittingly commit suicide. I lifted the trunk inside the bathysphere. There was enough room for me to place it at my feet for the return journey. I had 8 minutes left, so quickly went round the front of the ship to investigate if there was anything further. I found another skeleton, this one laying on its back with a knife among the rib bones and thick red stains in the wood, with a rucksack nearby. I had 6 minutes left, so grabbed the rucksack and sat back in the bathysphere, locking the door tightly behind me as I got in. Once the bathysphere doors were closed, the artifact stopped glowing from my pocket entirely, and I was once again immersed in the pitch darkness of the deep ocean. I turned on my torch and rummaged through the rucksack. There was little of note, aside from a letter and a photograph. The photograph was of a man who looked to be in his mid-30s, with a wife and 2 children stood in front of him. I began reading the letter. Dearest Lily, I suspect you will never get this letter, but I must document what has happened to me. I did find the wreck. By God, Lily, I found it. It's more miraculous than anything you could ever imagine. It feels like an alien world down here. There's some sort of technology or magics that allow me to breathe in a bubble of air. I write this now set on the deck of a shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean. Sadly, I was cut off from my reading by the sudden jolt of the bathysphere beginning its ascent. I checked the watch. I still had 3 minutes left by my count, and I took a moment to praise my own caution. I continued reading as the bathysphere was once again submerged in the ocean. Sadly, I was careless in my enthusiasm. I told the men to begin the ascent once the rope had been slack for precisely half an hour, and I was so worked up in the wonders I found down here that I could only watch in despair as the bathysphere rose upwards without me inside of it. I waited for several hours, hoping they would send it back down, but well, I suppose it was foolish of me to hope. As I write these words, my dearest Lily, I stream with tears, for I will never hold you in my arms again or see your beautiful smiles, Thomas and David. I can only hope that one day you get this letter and you know I spent my last moments thinking of you all, ending my life on my own terms. Should anyone find this letter, please deliver it to my wife, if you can. Lily, Thomas, David, I love you all so much. Your loving husband and father, Alfred. As I rose from my trance, I realized the giant squid were no longer nearby. Not a single one had attacked the bathysphere on my ascent. The stillness and dark of the deep ocean seemed far more suffocating and the silence deafening now, as I slipped into a deeply somber mood for the loss of this poor man's life, lasting until the ocean turned from black to blue again. The bathysphere was pulled up from the water and placed on the deck of the ship, watching as visible relief washed over Michael's face to see me put a hand up to him through the bathysphere window. The bathysphere was placed on the deck of the ship, and as Michael opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the wind blowing against my face, cementing the ordeal as done. I had survived an excursion to the blind realm, unaided, something few others could ever say they had done. I almost fell out of the bathysphere, relief washing over me as I stretched all my limbs. I turned to see Michael already unloading the trunk from the bathysphere. Don't open it, Michael. There are powerful artifacts in there, some even I would not dare tamper with. Michael took his hands off of the trunk.
You could have told me that before I grabbed the damn thing.
The trunk is safe to handle. I moved over and helped him place it into the center of the deck. I opened the lid and Michael took a cautionary step back.
How in God's name did you get that chest into there?
Another artifact had created a contained sphere of air around the wreckage. The original crew must have activated it as the ship sank, thinking it would save them. There was also this. I handed Michael the photograph and letter from the Explorer. He took off his hat after he read it.
Thank God you had the sense to get back inside on time.
Your watch is 3 minutes early, Michael. Michael's face went pale as the potential consequences dawned over him. No matter. I am here and I recovered the artifacts. I checked my watch. We have little under an hour before he arrives.
Who does? You got a partner in this line of work?
I closed the lid of the trunk. Almost. Head back to the dock. I'll explain what I saw along the way. I told Michael every detail of my journey, and though his face remained stoic and focused, I could tell he was captivated. I showed him the hexagonal rod that had dimmed further and further as we came away from the blind realm. Michael seemed almost fearful to touch it at first.
And this is what drew the squid. Why?
I don't know. Truthfully, I only fully understand one or two of the artifacts in that chest, but the more important question is how such a collection was assembled, and how it ended up sinking on a fishing vessel. The dock was only minutes away now. I went back to the deck and opened the trunk again, looking carefully inside. In the bright light of day, I noticed the lid had a small pocket within it, and when I opened it, several pieces of paperwork presented themselves. My eyes widened in horror as I read, before I began to feel the slowing of the ship as we pulled into the dock. I stood with Michael on the beach, trunk between us. The wind was gentle now, and the clouds seemed to begin dissipating. Michael was nervous.
August, we're in plain view here. What if someone gets suspicious?
Trust me, Michael. Once he arrives, no one will even remember we were here. Michael tensed at these words, preparing himself. I wish I could have warned him of what he was about to witness, but with his firmly held beliefs, I feared he would snap at me. Suddenly, a rush of wind came from behind us, and I turned to meet Lazaire's gaze.
August, who is this?
His name is Michael, Lazaire. He has been an ally of mine since I arrived here. Without his help, I would not have secured the information I have. Lazaire's gaze bore into Michael, who tried to meet it unflinchingly.
You will tell no one of what you see here today. Do you understand? Who are you?
Michael, I interrupted. This is an angel. You are best to comply with him. Michael sneered at the comment, but when his eyes met Lazaire's again, his face went white as a sheet, and he nodded.
I am unworthy in your presence.
He babbled. No, Michael, he turned to me. You are not a weak-minded man. Do not act like one, and he will not treat you as such. Michael cleared his throat and stood taller, trying to regain his own composure. Lazaire looked back at me.
What have you found?
I opened the trunk for Lazaire to inspect, and he peered inside as I spoke. This town is occupied by an entity that steals people entirely at night. The entity fears light and fire, is spiritual in nature, but can assume a physical form when needed. The man who recently died used to conduct a ritual every 10 years to keep the entity satiated, but the methods and materials used do not align with the effect it had. The only other information I found was the entity started appearing after a fishing vessel sank not far from the coast, into the blind realm. With Michael's help, I visited this wreck and discovered a number of artifacts. Artifacts, I spoke as I pulled the documents from the trunk out of my jacket pocket, that were being shipped by Dr. William Blake. Lazaire's eyes swiftly met mine, and he stood and inspected the documents. After a heavy moment of silence, Lazaire handed the documents back.
August.
His voice was now razor-sharp.
My sight has not yet returned to this town. I cannot see what happens past this beach. But I do know this. These relics you have gathered, they are of no action or consequence to what is happening here.
It was as I feared. The wreck might be linked to the consequences of the town somehow, but it was not even an indirect cause. They were two separate events.
This town must now be purged, August.
The weight of his words took a moment to sink in, but it was as I feared. Michael began to shiver, and I could feel his anger radiate from behind me. Lazaire, there are good people here. Innocent people. You cannot purge it because of a single entity, I protested.
Do not presume to be in control here, August. The presence of Dr. Blake, combined with the power of the relics you have recovered, is too great a risk. This may only be the surface of his influence upon this town.
Lazaire suddenly lost his focus on me. His gaze darted past the beach and towards a house. A gush of wind enveloped us, and he suddenly had his hands around a woman's throat, effortlessly lifting her 2 feet off the ground as she struggled to breathe.
Emma!
Michael screamed and moved forward instinctively, but Lazaire turned his head and fixed his gaze into him, causing him to crumple to the ground, wheezing and clutching his chest in agony. "Enough, Lazaire!" I screamed. "Give me 24 hours, and you will have your answers. Release these people!" Lazaire's golden eyes bore into my own, and I bore back. Lazaire dropped Emma, gasping for breath as she recovered. He glanced at Michael, who released his chest, taking in great lungfuls of air.
24 hours, August. Turn away.
I turned and felt the great wind pressure behind me, and the only sounds left were the wheezing of Michael and Emma. The trunk was gone, and as I patted my clothes, so was the hexagonal rod. Lazaire obviously didn't trust me with the artifacts either. He had left the paperwork, however, and I collected it from the ground. Emma quickly got to her feet and took several steps backward.
What just happened? How did I get on the beach?
She was primed, ready to run, whilst Michael was slowly getting himself to his feet. "Are you all right, Michael?" Michael nodded as he struggled to draw breath back into his lungs. "Emma, was it? Why were you watching us?" I had to be calm and straightforward. Anything else and she would likely bolt to rally the town against me. She remained quiet. She was in her early 20s, short brown hair with glasses and a slender frame, striking features that belied an air of maturity for her age. "My name is August Reach. I've come here to rid you of the entity taking the townspeople. Michael tells me you've already suffered greatly." She took a moment to judge me, then tears began to well up in her eyes.
Michael, is he telling the truth?
She shouted past me. Michael finished coughing and composed himself by standing tall and upright, but flinched at the pain in his ribs as he did. He turned to Emma.
Aye, he is.
Michael went over to her.
Be calm, girl. He's here to help.
Oh, right.
She quipped whilst wiping her tears.
Just like Rodney was, I'm sure. Look where that got us.
She no longer looked primed, ready to run, but I could tell by her expression her defences were still up.
Hold your tongue, girl.
Michael sneered.
Why should I? My mum was the only one who died, and all he says was sorry.
I told you to be quiet. Rodney did more for this town than all of us put together. You should be grateful for what he sacrificed.
Enough, both of you. Emma, it would help my investigation enormously if you would talk with me. I'm trying to help. She met my stare as I heard Michael whisper into my ear.
You're wasting your time, August. Girl hasn't lifted a finger to help this town her whole life. Just sits in her misery even before her sister was taken.
I turned to him, anger coursing through my veins. A child had her mother snatched from her life. Something that happened to yourself, might I remind you. Maybe you should reconsider your harsh judgment. Michael's voice raised to meet mine.
Do not lecture me on pain, August. Yes, we've both hurt. But I didn't blame the town. I didn't blame the one man who helped me, and my dad in our darkest hour. More and more people in this town suffer every day. But she thinks she got it worse than me, then the Madisons. She'll probably think she's got it worse than Father Pierce does right now.
I can hear you.
She shouted, drawing both our gazes back to her.
I've only got my dad left. I think that gives me the right to be just a little fucking angry.
Aye, but it don't give you the right to go snooping on our business.
She huffed and turned to leave. She walked for only a few moments before turning back and looking at me.
Do you know Rodney?
She shouted. The waves crashed around me as I considered my answer. This woman had suffered enough. She deserved only the truth. No, I never heard of him before I came here, I shouted back.
Then I've something to tell you. Alone.
Michael walked down the beach past Emma and towards his house, not bothering to look at her. Where do you want to talk? 20 minutes later we headed down the beach, past the town, where Emma directed us up onto a sloping hill, partway up a cliff face. The view was beautiful up here. I had a vantage point of the entire town. I saw now that the town was located in some enormous valley between the cliff I was on and the one on the other side. I could see the church located towards the entrance of the valley, hence why the road had sloped upwards as I approached from the town centre, and the beach and the dock out to the other side. The hotel was just before some larger properties where the Madisons resided, between the town centre and where I now stood.
You see furthest from us, other side of the town, the road going up the cliff.
I strained my vision to see the road, and how it leads to a small derelict building and what must be the remainder of the greenhouse Carl had mentioned. Yes, I see it. Emma was stood partway forward from me, and, as was noticeably lower than me on the slope, she kept her gaze focused on the town.
I've never told anyone this before. Never found someone who didn't trust Rodney. It was a few years before my mum died. I was out alone after dark. I'd heard the stories but didn't believe them. I heard someone coming and thought I could hide and jump out and scare him. The moon was out that night. Felt like looking at the world in black and white. Like it wasn't real. Then I saw Rodney. I knew I shouldn't upset him. Knew he was important. So I stayed hidden but kept watching. I watched him go into a corner of the greenhouse and sweep some debris away and lift up a hatch or something. Then he walked down some stairs and closed the hatch.
She took a moment to take a deep breath. Are you all right? I asked. She nodded.
I've been waiting years to tell someone that. Feels good to finally get it off my chest.
Is that the reason you distrust Rodney? She turned and moved up the cliff to stand next to me.
Mostly. He was too calm about everything. Even the thing.
Are you aware of the ritual he would perform? She nodded.
My dad told me about it. Said Rodney was protecting the town. Still feels off. Unnatural, if you ask me.
What was?
Did Michael not tell you?
When I stayed silent, she laughed.
Of course he didn't. Everyone loves Rodney. He didn't just die an old man. He was 143 when he finally kicked it.
What? I was in disbelief. That was a phenomenal age to reach unless aided by magics.
Rodney told everyone it was a side effect of the ritual. A curse he had to endure to keep the town safe. I think it was a win-win for him personally. He gets to live longer, and he's the town hero. Then all he has to do is tell me and my family sorry. It's not good enough.
Something clicked in my head. I pulled the document out of my jacket pocket and read it over as Emma stood waiting, finding precisely the artifact I was looking for. But it still didn't make sense. If I was right, why were the creature attacks still happening? I had one final lead provided by Emma. If I was wrong, these people would die. I had to move quickly. I pocketed the document again and turned to Emma. Emma, thank you so much for your story. You may have just saved this town, if I'm right. I took off down the cliff, but only took a few steps before she shouted at me.
Wait!
I swiveled back around.
I've accepted my mum is gone. I can live with that. I can live with that pain.
Tears streamed from her face.
But not my little sister. Please. Please tell me she can come back. It was only a few days ago.
My energy left me again as my heavy eyes met hers, tear-stricken. I'm sorry, Emma. I truly am. Emma sobbed heavily as her emotions came flooding forth, kneeling down and crying into her legs as she did so. I stood in silence. I couldn't bring myself to leave her up here in this state.
Go.
Emma, you should...
I said go!
She shouted. I turned and moved down the hill, the sound of tears dying away behind me. I reached Michael's house as the night closed in, and I felt much safer being in the presence of light. I knocked loudly on the door. Michael opened it and I stepped past him and inside.
You took your bloody time.
Why? Why didn't you tell me Rodney was over 140 years old when he died? Michael stayed uncharacteristically quiet. Well?
He deserved better than that.
What?
He was a man, August. He weren't like this creature. He had a soul and a heart. He deserved to be fought as one of the best of us, not something else entirely. It's the curse he had to live with.
Michael, youth is not a curse, I declared.
Aye, you may think that. You tell that to Rodney, when his wife, 5 years younger than him, died looking like his mother. You tell that to a man who watched his only son die from old age in a hospital bed. You can't possibly know what he went through.
It was pointless to argue with him. Michael had spent his entire life cherishing this man. It was impossible to cast doubt on him, especially coming from a stranger he's known for a day. I exhaled hard. It doesn't matter now. I know where we'll find our answers. I know where Rodney was conducting the ritual. We armed ourselves both with a lantern and braved the night air. We stuck to the beach to avoid any possible contact with the entity or unwanted attention from the town, and once past it we cautiously climbed the cliff until we intersected with the winding, narrow road leading to what remained of the greenhouse, giving a view of the entire town from high up behind us. The greenhouse was far grander than I had suspected, almost 30 feet tall on its front face with most of the roof missing, as well as 2 long sections that extended from its midsection with rounded domes connecting them to the main structure. The frame was rusted iron, which was mostly intact, however only a few panes of glass remained in their original place. Clearly the structure had been cleaned of any larger shards over the years, but for the most part many smaller pieces still covered the ground, both inside and out.
Damn thing should have been destroyed years ago,
Michael whispered. We went inside the main structure. The sections were cut off internally by knee-height brick walls with a gap in them, likely for doors. I went over to the back corner and began sweeping away glass and debris. By the light of the lantern there were no noticeable markings or switches, not even an outline of a potential hatch.
August,
Michael whispered. I moved over to him and saw that the corner he was in was fully clear of debris, and a stark outline of a hatch was in the floor. There was no handle or noticeable mechanism to open it, however, until I spotted something carved into the brick. I traced my finger along it to ensure I had the correct word in the low light. "Bars," I whispered, and the hatch opened enough to get purchase underneath.
what did you do?
It's the Persian word for open. Perhaps Rodney was more educated than I realized. I lifted the hatch and saw a stairwell descending deep into the ground. As we made our way down the steps, our lanterns barely illuminated more than 10 feet ahead of us. The tunnel was a continuous archway made of solid concrete, with no light incorporated into the design. It carried on for approximately 100 meters before forking in 2 different directions. I could see light on the path to the left, so began moving down that way with Michael close behind. This fork culminated in a sturdy door built into it at the end of the passage, open just enough for flickering light to escape through it. I grabbed the door handle and turned to Michael. He nodded, and with a sudden twist I flung it open. No one was inside. Multiple candles burned around the room on iron stands, providing more than enough light for the work that had occurred here. There was a large central desk with several mismatched styles of wooden chair around it, and 3 fully filled bookcases against the adjoining walls besides the door. The table was littered with pieces of paper, what looked to be various tools and minerals, as well as some organic components.
This is where he did it.
I don't think so. By Carl's notes, the ritual involved Rodney lying on a plinth. I believe this is where he conducted his research. I began inspecting the books on the shelves whilst Michael examined the items on the table.
I feel like I shouldn't be looking at this stuff.
That's just it, Michael, I spoke as my eyes scanned over the books. These books, only 1 or 2 of them hold any real information in them. The rest are just fiction. In fact, I'd imagine many of them contradict each other. It's almost as if I took a large tome and placed it on the table, a large sigil of some kind carved into it with a snake hissing at the reader. These books are here to appear unnatural, rather than containing any true occult knowledge.
Only he came down here. Why would he do that?
In case anyone managed to break in, I suppose. Only someone like myself would notice this for the facade it is. Anyone uneducated could easily fill their head with falsehoods and know nothing of what he was really doing. I placed the tome back on the shelf, but as I did notice some very lightly carved runes on the brickwork in the corner. These were not a typical language, they were ancient in nature.
So, Rodney put tricks in here to make sure no one else would learn the ritual? Man was cautious to a fault,
Michael whispered. I moved over to the runes and began inspecting them. They were a combination lock of some kind, but the order they were carved in seemed incorrect. I realized the bricks that they were transcribed on were loose as I touched them. I placed my lantern down and slowly slid out a brick, finding only the back half to be set into the wall. I repeated this with 2 more bricks, and replaced them in what I believed to be the correct position. They glowed in harmony with one another, and the bookcase directly opposite the door to my right swung open partially. Michael moved with me and swung the bookcase open, revealing an empty space about 1/2 a meter cubed behind it. There were 2 shelves in it. One contained a piece of metal situated inside a rune I did not recognize, surrounded by 4 iron spikes whose tips were stained red. The lower shelf contained only a plain-looking journal. I asked Michael to lift the lantern directly in front of the metal in the rune, being careful not to touch anything. The light of the lamp made the metal react strongly, beginning to glow white and letting off its own light. Good God! Did Blake give you this? I whispered to myself.
What? What is that?
It's feather silver. It would take too long to explain properly, but think of it as a piece of an angel's halo. This must be what's preventing Lazaire's sight into the town. I took the notebook and sat on a chair, reading as quickly as I could. As I read, the notebook confirmed all of my fears and worse. I kept reading, but my stomach grew sick and my heart heavy with the truth finally revealed to me. After 10 minutes, suddenly a choir of chanting came echoing down the tunnel.
Who was that?
Someone is conducting the ritual again. I leapt from my chair, taking the notebook with me and grabbing the lantern. Michael followed swiftly behind. When we encountered the fork in the path, the chanting came from the route we had not yet explored, so we hurried down another long, dark tunnel until we finally emerged into what seemed like it had once been a grand ballroom, ornate candle holders around the outside edges. I looked up to the stage at the far end of the room to see about half a dozen people chanting. I did not recognize half of them, but I did recognize the Madisons, and I recognized Shannon, holding the one artifact I'd been looking for. Stop! Stop this now! You don't realize what you're about to do! I shouted through the hall as I ran towards them. The chanting stopped and all turned to face me.
Silence!
Shannon shouted. She saw Michael running behind me and anger flooded her face.
You should have known better than to bring outsiders here if Rodney trusted you with this knowledge as well, Michael.
Shannon, you have to stop this right now. The ritual isn't helping. It's the cause. Michael stood dumbfounded next to me at my words. Shannon scoffed.
What are you talking about? How do you even know about the ritual?
I was sent here to save this town. I'm an expert on the occult. There is no entity. It was Rodney. Michael's face sunk in disbelief.
August, what the hell are you talking about?
Michael sneered. I put Rodney's diary in his hand, but shouted so the rest could hear as well. Many years ago, a man visited this town. His name was Dr. William Blake. By chance, he and Rodney became friends, and so Blake used him to conduct some occult experiments with the artifacts he had gathered. The one you are holding now, Shannon, it allows its user's soul to leave its body for a time. In this state, your soul becomes the entity, feasting on others' essence to invigorate your own. Blake left this town and took his artifacts with him, but he left that for Rodney to continue the experiment. He has been using it on the town ever since. My words hung in the air, Michael and the others desperately clinging to denial.
How dare you? How dare you come to our town and accuse Rodney, of all men, of such evil?
Shannon, listen to me, I pleaded. Why do you think he lived so long? Why do you think the attacks only occurred the night of his ritual? Shannon blinked, still clinging to belief that Rodney hadn't been deceiving her. After he died, you started doing the ritual instead, didn't you? Did Rodney tell you to do it? Shannon began to shake but stiffened her lip and stood up straight. Look at you, Shannon. Haven't you wondered why you've been getting younger? Rodney only did it enough to extend his life. You've taken the essence of almost a dozen people in 10 days. It isn't a curse of the ritual. Your youth is made of blood. Tears streamed down her face before she finally wiped them away and began to laugh, sinking my stomach further.
I see now.
She said with a pained smile.
You're very convincing, Mr. Reach, but I will not be swayed from my faith by pretty lies. I know Rodney. I know that man protected this town and loved us, and you are nothing but a heretic. I know now that Rodney was wrong about one thing. It's not enough for one of us to do the ritual.
She turned back to the others.
We are strong. We are a family. Rodney has shown us the path, and now it is up to us to walk it, to conquer this evil. Lay on the floor, my friends, and soon we will be free of all this pain.
My eyes widened, and I darted forward, but my collar was grabbed and I was thrown backwards hard onto the floor. Michael towered over me.
Should have known. I should have known you weren't here to help.
Michael, stop this! I screamed. You have been blinded by Rodney your entire life. Don't willfully let him continue to deceive you now. I tried to scramble to my feet, but Michael kicked me and I went down again, winded this time.
Stay down, August. I don't want to hurt you.
October. My wheezing prevented me from finishing the sentence any further.
What?
Michael spoke at me. I looked over at the stage and everyone was now laid down ready to be displaced from their bodies. One spirit nearly destroyed this town. If 5 were seen at once, there would be no hope left. I took in a deep breath and tried to speak again. October 12th, 1939. Michael's shoulders stiffened. He picked the diary back up and found the date beginning to read. I regained my composure and got to my feet. Tears streamed down his face until finally he threw the diary away from him and let out a guttural scream of anger and betrayal. He then charged at the stage, climbing onto it just as the last person besides Shannon had completed the ritual.
Michael, what are you doing? How dare you go against Rodney?
Shannon screamed. Michael slapped her and she crumpled to the floor.
He tricked us. He tricked us all, Shannon. It's over there in that damn diary. He didn't care about you, he didn't care about me, or anyone in this town. He didn't give a rat ass about anything else.
Shannon laid there dumbstruck as the full gravity of her actions weighed on her. She curled into a ball and began to cry. When I climbed onto the stage, Michael was shaking them.
They're dead, August.
Only temporarily. It means their spirits have already assumed the form of the entity and are descending on the town. We won't have long before someone dies. In a group they'll likely be far bolder.
What can we do?
Michael's voice was trembling now. The artifact can't reverse its own effects. We can't fight them. We need... My mind flared, and I hopped off the stage and ran out of the hall into the tunnel. I moved as fast as I could back into the study room, rushing over to the shelf with the feather silver on it. I gritted my teeth and removed the feather silver from the room, and screamed into the empty room. Lazaire! Lazaire, if you can see me, I need you now! Michael ran into the room just as a rush of wind scattered papers about Lazaire's feet.
August, you informed me there was only a single entity. Why can I sense 5?
He said calmly in the corner. There is no time to explain, Lazaire, but you cannot harm them. They are transposed spirits, not true evil. You must drive them back here, force them to re-enter their bodies.
There is not enough time to drive them all back before they claim a life.
I began to panic before my gaze fixed on a candle. Light. I turned back to Lazaire. Lazaire, flood the whole town with light. It will drive them back. Lazaire nodded and in a gust of wind was gone. I turned to Michael. Quickly, outside! We both ran down the dark corridor without any light source, seeing a glow come from up ahead. We rushed up the stairs to find the greenhouse illuminated from an immensely bright object hovering 100 feet over the town, almost like a star burning too close to the earth. I struggled to see anything from the sheer power of the light, but I heard the screeching of multiple entities as they charged back towards the cliffs. One came up the road using the trees as cover, but spotted myself and Michael. It charged forwards, clearly intent on satiating itself despite its hatred of the light. I fell backwards in terror, fully believing I would be killed. But then the light pulsed to an almost blinding intensity, and I heard the creature hiss in front of me as it covered its eyes and vanished into the tunnels. The light finally dimmed, before snuffing out altogether, leaving us in pitch darkness. My night vision adjusted quickly to see Michael next to me, unharmed and standing. I breathed a heavy sigh of relief as I felt another gush of wind behind me.
It is done. I can no longer sense the entities.
Thank you, Lazaire. My tone was laden with a burden now fully relieved from my mind. The town was finally safe.
I want to know what happened here, August.
Tomorrow, Lazaire. There are still loose ends to tie up. Lazaire turned his head as if to hear something behind him, but there were no sounds.
Yes, I see.
Lazaire vanished in a gust of wind, and I heard a scream come from the tunnel. I looked at Michael, and we both ran back inside, straight past the fork and into the main stage area again. The others had all awoken, with Lazaire brandishing an enormous silver sword aimed at Shannon's chest. Lazaire, wait! She was tricked! Everyone was tricked by Rodney! Shannon stood tall and proud, her face red and puffy from crying. Lazaire met her gaze, and she returned it without flinching. She then nodded and stepped forward, impaling the enormous blade straight through her. The others gasped, and I fell to my knees.
I'm sorry.
She sputtered through a mouthful of blood before her body went limp. Lazaire looked at the others who partook in the ritual, and they all lost consciousness and fell to the floor. I rushed over to find them all still breathing.
I have cleared their minds. They will remember nothing of tonight.
And what about Shannon? I forced through gritted teeth. Why did she have to die?
It was her choice, August. Seal this chamber when you leave. Do not attempt to take the feather silver.
And with that, everyone had vanished in a gust of wind, aside from myself and Michael. After a prolonged silence, Michael placed an arm on my shoulder whilst I kneeled on the stage.
I owe you an apology, August, and a debt I can never repay.
He spoke softly as I got to my feet. That can wait. Let's go get some rest, Michael. We exited the tunnel, sealed the hatch, and went back to Michael's to dwell on the evening's events. I stood on the cliff face almost 100 yards away from the ruins of the greenhouse in the light of day. The previous evening's events had one final thing left to clean up, and I had found it. Symbols were carved deep into the rock, and Michael stood next to me with a hammer. I nodded, and with great force he brought the hammer down, several times until the rock crumbled into dust. There. Now there's nothing left.
I don't understand why he needed it, though.
Rodney couldn't risk having the entity appear next to him if others were involved in the ritual, like Father Pierce. He needed the entity to manifest far away from himself. I kicked one of the fragments down the hill. Myself and Michael stared out over the town, which sprawled out below us in the distance.
I don't know how I can ever thank you for what you did here, August.
No thanks necessary. Michael sighed heavily.
I feel like such a fool.
He fooled everyone, Michael, and you were only a child when you met him. You can't blame yourself for his deception. How are the Madisons and the others from the ritual?
They're fine. Went into town before you woke up and saw them. David said him and Janice slept right through the flash of light. No one knows what happened last night, luckily. The town seems lighter now, though, like a burden has been lifted.
I smiled.
August. I don't know what to do.
About what? I asked.
About Rodney. Man was a monster hiding among us. This town still thinks he was a hero. It don't sit right with me. I don't want that to be his legacy, not now that I know the truth.
I pondered his words before I replied. Do you want Rodney to be hated, or to be forgotten? Michael turned to me.
What kind of question is that?
You said the town felt lighter now. The entity is gone and people can move on with their lives. If they learn the truth, though, that Rodney was the evil all along, it would darken this town. It would be a history that none could ignore, and it would weigh down their souls. If, however, you allow him to be a hero, people will move on. They will forget about him, and they will be happy once again. You once said to me you wanted Rodney to be remembered as one of you, as a man, not something else entirely. I think I agree with that now, but for everyone else's sake, not his.
I want him punished for what he did, August.
I understand the need for justice, but trust me, his soul is not in paradise. The implication of my words seemed to satisfy Michael. I checked my watch. I was due to head to the beach. Michael, I extended a hand outward towards him. Thank you for all your help. Were it not for you, this town would likely have been destroyed. You should be proud. Michael nodded and shook my hand firmly.
I hope I see you again someday, August.
He smiled. And you, my friend. Take care. I left Michael on the cliff face and began walking down towards the beach. I arrived back on the beach to find Lazaire ready and waiting for me.
Thank you, August.
His voice was calm and controlled as always, but I wasn't in the mood for it. No. No, you don't get to thank me, Lazaire. You gave me an ultimatum that forced me to act to save these people's lives. I don't care what the risks are to you or your superiors. If you ever summon me again with the intention of purging innocence before letting me finish my work, our arrangement is through. Do you understand me? Lazaire's gaze was almost of apathy as he met mine, but he knew I wasn't bluffing.
Very well.
He replied.
Are you ready to leave?
I nodded at him and looked out towards the ocean. A gust of wind, and I was standing in my house again. Again, I want to thank you all for tuning into my broadcasts over the years. I understand many of you made the ultimate sacrifice due to my actions, and any apologies would be hollow. But I can say, with certainty, this has been my final broadcast.
What do you mean, final broadcast? You think this is still a game?
I've got a deal for you.
We have a deal, and you're about to break it.
My broadcasts aren't reaching as many people as you'd hoped. That's why you're making me read one of my stories.
Well done, August. Would you like a doggy treat for finally figuring that one out?
I've got a better deal, in exchange for Mary's safety. One that will help you reach more people than you could possibly imagine.
Like what?
I'll tell you once you release Mary. Permanently.
Do I look like an idiot? No matter what you offer, no matter what you do, I will not release Mary. She's mine forever, August. The deal stays the same.
I thought you'd say that.
So, your comment will cost you. All you've done is bring pain down upon Mary.
No. I just needed to keep you talking.
Auriphalus!
Thank you, Lazare. Mary can rest easy now.
August, there is something we must discuss.
What?
You must continue your broadcasts.
Why would I possibly do that, Lazare?
We will provide the stories.
I don't understand. It will only spread more evil, Lazare. I won't do it.
You will, August. Mary will no longer be tormented. You have my word on that. Now do as we ask.
You would use my own wife to blackmail me?
Enough. You will read the stories we provide when the preparations have been made.
What's really going on here, Lazare? Why are you doing this?
Good night, August.